Welcome everyone to this Apigee Quickstart, Apigee Governance. I'll be your Apigee expert this week. My name is Tyler Ayers, and I'm a customer engineer and an architect based in Berlin. We're going to start out with a short introduction to the pay-as-you-go Quickstart program, then move into an overview of API governance, and then dive into some automation topics around CI/CD. So let's start with the pay-as-you-go Quickstart program. This program is composed of virtual sessions, so if you're getting started or new to Apigee Pay-as-you-go, these sessions are for you. We start with a foundation, and then we move on to deep dives into specific areas of the Apigee product. We're going to cover technical governance, but also business topics, so this should be useful to a variety of users. Office hours are then a great way to connect and ask questions with our experts and hear from other customers. So our approach is based on a consistent universal API platform, and then laying the foundations with the product, and then offering Apigee product deep dives on top of that with Q&A, then getting into governance and CI/CD, that's our session today, and then moving on to API maturity, so looking at use cases and success stories. So let's dive right in to API governance. Great API developer experiences need three things: great API products, so having APIs with a product mindset, not a technical or a project mindset. A great API developer portal, so we need a storefront to drive adoption, evangelism, get the word out. And then great developer enablement, so how do developers learn about, connect to, start using the APIs and start succeeding and getting these API usage into production. It's always a question, so how can we faster innovate and drive productivity in our organization? There's a lot of external forces working here: competition, consumer expectations, new technology. At the same time, we have internal forces, so there's services, data sprawl, keeping the lights on, customer centricity, autonomy. So it's really a question of how much control should we have, but how can we connect to the external forces and participate in the API economy? How can we best gain efficiencies, drive reuse, but also be aware of risks and fraud and participate in a secure way in the API economy? And then a question of, which API should we focus on? So let's dive into the success metrics for an API program. Of course, the critical metrics go from speed, so how quickly can the internal dev teams go from an idea to a published API product on the marketplace. The adoption speed, so how quickly can a consumer developer get to first hello world on the APIs. API product quality, so how well designed and consistent are the APIs, how well documented are they? And then usage growth, so how quickly are you adding new developers? What's the engagement? What's the adoption like? So these are the key metrics to measure when looking at the success of an API program. This changes over time, of course. When we're getting started, we start with crawl, so just looking at the number of APIs, number of developers, speed, the quality of the APIs. Then as we get to the walk phase, let's look at product adoption, so how many apps are created, how many partners, number of customers, how long is the onboarding process, what's the NPS score. And then when we move to run, we're looking at really business impact, direct revenue. What's the breadth of the business, cost reduction, growth of traffic. And the target, of course, is a 10x transformation of business value. So we go from scaling projects, normally to 10x projects that really change the game. Should always be, looking ahead, right? So how can these APIs drive new adoption, new product revenue streams? How can we scale our digital footprint and connect with new types of users, new types of customers? So looking at, blue ocean as opposed to red ocean. So if we look at the strategic roadmap across disruptions, transformations, quick wins, and developments, you can kind of order these into short-term, visionary, what's the scale? Is it, small scale or 10x? And then think about, where do we fit in to this matrix, right? Where's our sweet spot? Where do we start and where do we want to get to? The value drivers are core, of course. They're really key. So what's the strategic vision? Right? Who believes in the API program? Who's pushing it? What's the revenue potential and growth for the API program? How much money can we save, right, through reusing and helping the organization transform? And what's the customer impact, right? So how are the customers actually using and benefiting from these APIs? The big rocks to orient to, right, to kind of give a center to the whole program is bringing together the right team. So a small cross-organizational team to bootstrap the API marketplace, the right governance, so establishing the right framework, optimizing for speed, leveraging automation, controls to remove friction, and combining that with the right strategy. So design the API marketplace that creates a platform for value contribution and realization. So a real push and pull ecosystem. This is how a program can be structured. This is just one option, right? Looking at, executive leadership, having an API architect, program lead, agile lead in place, and then thinking about these three pillars. The operations, so who manages the day-to-day, the monitoring, the CI/CD, the automation. Dev portal. This is a topic that's really strategically important, right? Engaging with developers, marketing, UX, UI, documentation, technical writers, QA. So really bringing people to the storefront to push out the best possible experience to users. And then the API product team. And you can think of these as product owners, developers, evangelists. So really bringing the topic of API products to the organization. This is just an example, right? You can adapt, you can mix and match this to match, your organization specific needs, but it's a good orientation point for what types of roles are out there, are needed, what value do they bring. The governance is there to manage risk while also enabling the speed to market, and then bringing together principles, standards, the team and customer-driven design. So the mission statement, what's the purpose? Releasing continuously, looking at functionally based tools and permissions, cross-functional teams, and of course everything automated end-to-end, including the compliance via CI/CD. The playbook is quite simple. Going from organization, best practice design, development, management, support. So bringing together the right people to build the playbook for your organization. The strategy you can see is the North Stars, right? So looking at something like what the New York Times is doing, or MapQuest, or TomTom. Also in financial services or travel, San Francisco Airport, payment services, right? So in any industry, in all industries, the strategy is key. What's the developer story? What's the ecosystem story? How does the engagement work? And this all comes together into the digital ecosystem. So starting internal ecosystems. How do we connect our teams? How do we spread the use of APIs, reusing APIs, collaborating on APIs? Then expanding to partner ecosystems. So looking at bringing in suppliers, joint go-to-markets. Going further into industry ecosystems. So demand and sales channels. What's the incentives? How can this work across the entire industry? And the public ecosystem. So monetizing APIs to connect in a larger context, right? So bringing affiliates, bringing different participants, different levels of access into the ecosystem. So let's go through the API governance best practices. We already said API governance is about reducing risk while enabling teams to go faster. We can look at this as a triangle, bringing together autonomy, automation, and adoption. Of course, it's always a question of the center of excellence compared to the center of enablement. Center of excellence is bringing everything together into a central organizational unit, or the center of enablement is training the whole organization to use the platform effectively. It's kind of a difference between big G versus little g culture. Big G governance culture means having very strict rules, gates, and enforcements, top-down approvals, strict permissioning, strict documentation. Little g governance means having the standards and principles empowerment in place, right? So distributing the responsibility, releasing continuously, basically having teams take this and run with it, right? Maybe applying standards, but letting the teams implement and run with those standards themselves. I think most organizations these days are going for little g governance, right? Having more DevOps responsibility for the full stack, for everything in the teams. But as we know, we need to bring it all together, right? We can't have chaos. We can't have lots of divergent approaches, divergent standards, especially in the API space. Consistency is key. So that's what we want to achieve here. You can kind of see it like three modes, right? The policeman who enforces standards, core features, or the teacher who's enabling, right? So bringing principles, best practices, training, expertise, enablement, as well as the referee, right? So balancing different needs, maintaining impartiality, talking to the different stakeholders. Throughout it all, regardless of your specific model, the key is a consistent and defined approach to API products. So you can kind of see a traditional product is a good or service that meets the needs of a specific audience. An API product, of course, is looking at that digitally, right? So outside in, looking at who's going to connect and reuse this. And an Apigee API product is bringing together multiple APIs into a collection, right? Making it easy to subscribe to a whole domain or a whole bundle of APIs. Also being able to pay for different levels of access to those APIs. So that's key to the Apigee approach to API productization. And at the center of this is the API product mindset. This means designing and delivering APIs for long-term value at scale, and evolving them over time to meet changing customer needs. So this isn't just a one-off. It's not just a single project. It's a whole platform. It's a whole structure that's going to evolve and build over time. This is just key through the entire stack, right? So this filters down, right? If this is the core mindset, then everything else follows from this. What is in scope for API governance? We basically have this in 6 different domains. Engagement. So what's the plan for engaging with users? The platform itself. So how are we running and operating the APIs? The operations. So testing, updating, security, disaster recovery, failover. The portals itself, or portals, right? So how do users gain access and read and try out the APIs? Then managing the API consumers themselves, so registration, creation, support requests, and then managing the API providers. So bringing all the providers together into design, deployment, releasing, and making sure the platform is automated fully for everyone in the organization who's contributing or pushing, delivering APIs onto the platform. So let's dive into the API team. Typically, we have these skill sets of the API team. The API team leader, then there's the architects and the developers, then there's the evangelist, right, who's responsible for getting the word out, and then we have an extended team of stakeholders, right? So who's relying, watching, participating in this team from the outside. The API team leader is a typical product owner role, right? So this means strong relationship with the business, knows the ins and outs of the entire API platform, can translate high-level requirements also from customers, from users, and very good communication and listening skills. The architects and the API developers are the technical foundations, right? So specialized in API design and best practices. They can distill and interpret the complex requirements, translate those into real features. They know the technical concepts in and out. They know all the capabilities, iterative delivery approach, and also good communication and listening skills. The evangelist is passionate about the topic, believes in the mission, wants to build the app developer community, wants to help, be a helper, right? So helping app developers What do they need to be successful? Taking feedback from the consumers, bringing it back to the API team, good communication skills, listening skills, and also the onboarding process, right? So how to onboard new users effectively. The extended team covers different functional areas, everything from testing, automatic test creation, test suites, developers who are just pushing out services and need to push out API definitions as well. Ops teams, security teams, everyone who's interested, who has a stake in the topic of APIs. So in the end, if we go through the whole process, API teams are responsible for building, for learning and teaching, for engaging, for scaling this across the organization, and for improving the platform over time. So it's a lot of responsibility, and it's such a key topic in today's world, right? So all the more power, and building the right API team with the right foundation is so critical in today's world. Additionally, to set these teams up for success, we really recommend having strong executive sponsor support. This needs to be known. This isn't just a technical topic, right? This is key interfaces, key connections to users, to customers. This is product development. Absolutely should have a focus at the executive, from the business side as well as from the technical side. There should be a mandate to drive the API topic forward in the organization. It's key to the future success of every organization to be successful with APIs. The team should be extremely willing and open to train others. These should not be a closed system. It should be an open system, right? Bringing everyone together because everyone has a stake in this topic. There should be a direct access to lines of business, right? Because this should be a channel, one of the key channels to getting business products onto the market, right? So there needs to be direct communication there. Also very important is to remove pre-existing constraints, right? This shouldn't fit in the daily business across lots of teams that are already busy with other topics. There should be a strategic focus on this topic, and API should be the primary area of focus for the team who can build this platform, operate it, and drive it forward. So let's dive into the operating model. Starting out, we have the engagement phase, right? So a couple of people part-time, we've got the leadership in place, we have operations in place, we can start publishing, getting experience with the platform. Then we can go to the excitement phase, right? So getting some full-time people engaged. We've got leadership, now we have a small team, and we can continue to build out the platform. Once we expand, we can, of course, further expand our team, have expanded roles within the line of business teams. We can connect to development and bring this all together into line of business, product life cycles, product phases. And we have our portal that we're going to start publishing everything to, right? So we have a storefront. So it's visible, right? It's concrete. Everyone can see what we're doing and can contribute, learn, help us be successful in this topic. And then we come to the real scaling phase, the evangelization. We have lots of people involved, lots of roles. We've expanded maybe to multiple domains, multiple API teams who are driving this topic forward in the organization. And we've got lots of line of businesses and product teams on board, right? So this is something that's really become a key part of the overall organizational strategy. Headcounts, of course, can vary depending on the industry and the type of company. Talking about big companies, then the API needs staffing. The API topic needs staffing, right? So from leadership to the different domains, from operations, dev, portal, and API team. This isn't a topic to be cheap with, right? Because it's so key to digital productization and pushing products and updating products on the market. So having staffing and headcounts in place is very important. So that's that fundamental question, right? We want a centralized or a federated governance. We can also move over time, right? To think of, perceive control and the speed and decide, what type of hybrid model could be the right fit for our particular organization. It's a key decision. Get input. Talk about this with all the stakeholders. Decide on the right model. It could change over time, but make sure that it's not a accidental model, right? That just happens to come into place through, random and chance forces, but rather it's strategic, right? Think about the right model that has the right structure for the time and place and conditions that you have in your company. So here's a scoring framework for kind of, going through these topics, doing some scoring, some rating, and deciding where are we on the journey. Are we starting? Is it early, mid, or mature? Where do we want to go? Where are we today? So these are great things to talk about and build out in your organization. So just to summarize, we have, what's the strategy? What's the target operating model? And what's the pattern that we can evolve with, right? Let's build this out. Let's work with it over time. We want to have growth in place, right? We want to start small, but we want to scale and grow, and this should become one of the pillars of our organization, right? So let's look at how we can scale that program effectively. Always working with, the resources we have, but thinking ahead. What are we going to need in 3, 6, 12 months? And then making the right decision for the centralized versus the federated model, thinking about the roles and what's the center of enablement, what's the operating and enablement model for our API program. Great, so now that we have our API program in place, let's take a look at a key topic, CI/CD automation, right? Because that's key to scaling the program. If we don't have it automated, we can't scale it because there's a lot of manual steps involved, right? That's also key within Apigee, is that everything is API first in the Apigee platform, right? So we can automate through either CLIs or Terraform or other tools and make sure that our complete life cycle is automated end to end, and then we can scale this really effectively throughout the organization. So first, we're going to look at Apigee and CI/CD in general. What's the models that we typically recommend or that we see customers use? How do we do it internally? Look at the tooling available. Look at a product called API Hub that helps us organize the metadata and the assets in the organization. And then look at how we can automate the creation of an Apigee proxy and how this can flow into an automation pipeline. So when we just are starting out with Apigee, we typically are using the proxy editor, right? Where we have our flows in place, pre-flow, post-flow, different paths where we can add policies. It's a great way to start out and, gain experience. Can also test, modify, debug the proxies in real time. So this is the place to start. But of course, this is not something that scales, right? Because once we configure things, how do we replicate this between different environments? How can we make changes effectively, push them out to dev, test, prod, promote them into stages, right? So it's also very easy to lose changes because they get overridden by automation, right? So we have lots of tools in place to help manage this, but it's just something to be aware of, right? That the UI is great for starting out, but we generally want to scale to automation when we're moving further into CI/CD. So the personas and the goals in CI/CD go from development, so deploying and iterating on the application in isolation, then moving on to operations, so standardizing how teams are onboarded and applications are deployed and maintained, and then of course having the security view in place, right? So looking at what's our security, what are our security profiles, what are the policies, and how can we apply those across our API landscape, right? So that everyone benefits, everyone's protected, but not everyone has to reinvent the wheel themselves and define their own security policies. So the foundation are 3 pillars: configuration management, continuous integration, and continuous testing. So let's dive into each one. Configuration management is all about reproducibility and traceability. So provisioning an environment in an automated fashion, everything is deployed automatically. We can reproduce an environment and all the APIs from the same configuration, always on demand as needed. Traceability is that we can precisely determine all the versions and the dependencies used to create that environment. That it's very transparent, right? What are the versions? What are the assets? That we know exactly what is deployed where and what could explain, for example, different test results or other issues, right? So having everything traceable, that we know exactly which versions and which assets are deployed where. So when we have this all under management, there's a lot of benefits, right? We have disaster recovery. We can audit all the changes. It's a higher quality for users in the end. We can manage capacity, and we can respond more quickly to defects or issues, right? Because it's very easy to trace down, which version is in production or which version is being used, and then test, fixes and roll that out very quickly through automation. So some of the best practices here is that, of course, everything should be in a code repository. So all the assets are in a repo, like in a Git repo. That we have the builds completely automated, so we can push out new versions and deploy them anywhere on demand. That the build has testing built in, so both unit tests but also functional tests. Every commit should be tested. Make sure the build is super fast, right? So we're not relying on, remote environments or anything, but everything can be built and tested locally. Test everything in a clone of the production environment. Make it easy for everyone to get access to latest deliverables. Everyone can see the results of the latest build and automate that deployment end to end. The continuous integration benefits are that we can, find bugs early, right? So we're doing testing continuously. We're avoiding the last minute chaos of finding bugs, in production. We can measure exactly which changes resulted in a bug, right? And track that down very easily. We can always test a current build. Developers are pushed really to think more modular, right? Less complex code, make sure everything's covered by automatic tests. And that there's just less time spent debugging and more time working on features. So our continuous testing framework is going from the programming to business to project management and, of course, technology, right? So making sure that all of the phases are automated and that we have testing really across the entire spectrum. Within Apigee, we call this APIs as code. So meaning that from checking in a change, this can be completely automated, that we run our pipelines, quality analysis, linting, unit tests run on the APIs themselves, as well as on any other services that are being used or backends. Putting that into an API bundle, running integration tests, so load tests as well. We can run automatically in test environments, publishing those reports, updating documentation, and pushing that out. So this is kind of how we can automate everything, either using GitHub, GitLab, Google Cloud tools. So we're very flexible with lots of ways to automate this, and using Apigee tooling to apply this into any environment. So the Apigee APIs are kind of the center of truth here. So the tools all use the Apigee API layer, same as the developer portal and the web UI uses. So everything we can do in the portal, we can do with automation, and we can then automate and use across the full spectrum. And the back end, of course, we have the gateway APIs, we have the analytics APIs. So this is automating the Apigee tools, the assets in the background. So everything goes through the Apigee API first. So the CI/CD tools that we use in the Apigee universe, typically going from different types of assets, from caches to KVM target servers, the API definitions themselves, right? API products, apps, and app developers. This all contributes to the working API. This can be applied through either Maven, Apigee config plugins, the Apigee CLIs, or Apigee management APIs, right? All of these different assets. If we're going to store an API proxy in source control, we can do this, of course, manually. We can export revisions from the UI, unzip the package, and push it into a source code repository. Our Maven plugins can take those assets from the source code repository and deploy them into different Apigee environments. And of course, we can first test this, using automated testing. Apigee tool is only for the older version of Apigee, Apigee Edge. So this is no longer supported for Apigee X or Apigee Hybrid. Sockmesser is an open source tool that covers all versions of Apigee, so Apigee Edge, OPDK, as well as Apigee X and Hybrid. And Apigee CLI is a modern tool that's based just on the Google Cloud APIs. So this is just supporting Apigee X and Hybrid, but covers comprehensively all of the Apigee APIs in the Apigee X and Hybrid worlds, right? So you can also combine this very nicely with other Google Cloud APIs as needed, and so automating things very easily through Apigee CLI. G-Cloud is the Google Cloud SDK for all Google Cloud references or all Google Cloud assets. You can also manage a lot of Apigee with G-Cloud. It's always getting expanded all the time, but it's also because it's a centralized team, so this always is updated later with new features. So Apigee CLI is always available immediately, and G-Cloud gets features as well, and you can just check which fits your needs best, right? So Apigee CLI always has everything, and G-Cloud supports a subset within the G-Cloud framework. Behind the scenes, it's all going through the Apigee CLI, the Apigee API, so you can manage their permissions. Everything goes through Google IAM. You can use workload identity to run the commands in a CI/CD pipeline. So the Apigee API is the single point of truth for all of the automation. Here's an overview of Apigee deployment tooling across OPDK, Edge, X Hybrid, Docker. Is it an official Google product or not? So generally these days, Maven, Apigee CLI, G-Cloud, and using the API, as well as Sockmesser. These are all modern tools that work with Apigee X and Apigee Hybrid. And to a certain extent, some of these tools you can also go back to older versions of Apigee as well. The IDE integration is through the Google Cloud Code extension. So you can run this in VS Code. You have a local emulator for Apigee, so you can run everything locally. There's also an Apigee lint extension to lint Apigee proxies. So there's lots of ways of integrating this directly into your IDE. For example, Visual Studio Code. Local development uses a local Docker container. So an emulator, you can run all the Apigee proxies locally. You can test them. So this is super useful either locally on a laptop or a development environment, as well as in a CI/CD pipeline. Apigee lint can analyze all of the assets in Apigee and give recommendations around, what conforms to best practices and what doesn't. You can also add your own rules to Apigee lint. So this is very useful for doing quality controls, just using static code analysis. You can add your own rules to Apigee lint, so you can decide, what you want to track and flag as warnings and errors in the definitions. This is also available as a plugin, as an extension to VS Code, so you can see in real time on your Apigee proxies exactly the results of the linting of those proxies. Of course, if you use JavaScript policies in your proxies, you can also use ESLint, and this runs static code analysis across all of your Java code scripts that you might be using within your Apigee proxies. Unit testing is also quite useful to validate and test the APIs. Mocha is a very common JavaScript testing framework. You can run this on your Apigee JavaScript scripts as well. So if you're using any scripting logic, you can unit test this through Mocha, also directly in your IDE or in your CI/CD pipeline. Cucumber also supports Apigee behavior-driven development rules. So you can also define testing rules in natural language, behavior-driven development, and these can be run on your Apigee API using the Apigee project. Okay, so let's go through a complete end-to-end use case here. So starting with creating a proxy, we're going to do this directly in the proxy editor. We can do tracing, we can do everything then here visually. Then we're going to export this into our IDE. We're going to load the Apigee extension and use it to add some policies to our proxy. So for example, adding an API key check, spike arrest, CORS, other policies. Then we can also use OpenAPI to Apigee as a tool to convert OpenAPI specs into Apigee proxies. And this also takes some of the tags and converts them into Apigee policies as well. Or we can also create proxies through the Apigee CLI. So you can import a bundle also remotely from a GitHub repository. And here you can also then add your policies directly to the bundle in a text editor or VS Code or in the console. We can use the tool Visital to Apigee to convert SOAP services into Apigee proxies. So this is quite useful. And then we can also template out all of our policies, right? So we can, say we want to have the same authentication authorization consistently across our proxies, so that we can use this with proxy templates that are then used when we're creating new proxies. Self-service templates are really great for, helping people in the organization create their own APIs, right? So you can have templates in place, and then apply these when users want to push a new API definition into Apigee. The branching strategy goes through, thinking about a main branch, so just the default basically. To do feature branches, so if everything's in a GitHub repository, then we can also, if we want, do feature branches of our Apigee proxies. We can also do environment branches, for example, for integration testing, UAT, dev test prod. And then also track our revisions and deployments across these environments, right? So we can model these also in Apigee environments, promote our proxies across the environments as they get tested and approved, and eventually bring the proxies into production. So looking into an advanced scenario, and our personas, right, from security to product owner, proxy developers, these are kind of the steps that we can put in place for the governance and processing and ownership and responsibility, right? From defining the rules, define the product, implement the proxy, and then publishing that product and bringing it into production. The security leader is someone who can apply the security rules to our Apigee environments. We can manage this consistently and centrally, so that we have really consistent authentication, authorization, and security in place. The developer delivers the API proxies, right? So also uses templating, has everything in source control, has unit testing, CI/CD in place. The product owner is thinking of the product perspective. So what are customers going to use, defining those API products and publishing them into the API portal. And so if we look at a demo, we can have different projects all in different GitHub repositories. These are always all being built separately, tested, linted, checked, then deploying them into different Apigee projects and sending traces, reports, updates, results into a chat or different channels or email to alert users to the status. Here is a great repository resource for Apigee CI/CD assets. So we have examples of Apigee CI/CD automation in GitHub, GitLab, CircleCI, Azure pipelines, lots of other examples as well. So it's a great getting started area to see, hey, what fits your source and CI/CD platform, and using an example to set up how this could work with your Apigee environments. Here are some links to different assets from all of those different platforms. And with that, thank you very much for your attention today. Join us for a Q&A. You can ask questions or get advice in your particular setup or your particular questions. Just remember that the Apigee Advantage, is an industry leader for everything around API and API productization. We benefit from the intelligent platform in Google Cloud, right, with AI support across the board, making it faster, more secure to deliver and run APIs, and always built for growth so that you can start small but scale across your organization effectively to become API first and API focused moving forward. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. Here are links to enablement and learning platforms, also YouTube, different solutions that we published. There's lots more always being published in the Google Cloud Community Apigee channel, so keep your eye out there, and thank you very much.